Hi, welcome to Audiobook Academy. This is a self-paced audiobook. There's no need to keep an eye on things. Just pay attention. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Survey after survey has been conducted. Employers claim to appreciate the following talents the most. Critical thinking is frequently in the top 10 skills. In theory, however, valuing critical thinking is simpler. In practice, it's a little different. You will be able to think critically if you have a critical thinking mentality. To study data and identify the best course of action to make progress by understanding how to judge information, you can rely on developing mental agility, so that you can apply what you've learned from one circumstance to the next, learning to think like a quantum physicist while avoiding overthinking and balancing intellectual, strategic, and tactical considerations, as well as emotional thinking. The idea is to provide ourselves with time and resources in order to improve our ability to think, to get a better understanding of how things really are, to gain a deeper understanding of the world. This is not at all our natural way of thinking. Developing an attitude of critical thinking, it necessitates dedication and rigorous practice. That is why you have come. Congratulations on joining a long-standing tradition of effectively navigating the future through logic and reason, a 2,500-year-old tradition dating back to Socrates. Talk about concepts that are tenacious. The following is a nice critical thinking question. What evidence do you have that critical thinking began, for example, with Socrates rather than Confucius? We could now debate that issue. If, on the other hand, you begin your argument by asking questions, particularly when it comes to core notions, theories, or ideas, we'd use the Socratic technique, which was named after Socrates. So let's begin with Socrates, who pioneered the concept of doubting one's beliefs, skepticism of authority, evidence gathering, and a desire to live a life that is well considered. These were not well understood ideas. He also didn't write anything down. Socrates was an outspoken critic of the written word, because he thought writing was bad. To use discussion as a means of discovering the truth. His thoughts, on the other hand, were eventually written down by his student Plato. Thank Plato for that, for Platonic love, and for founding the first Western philosophical school. Aristotle studied at the Academy. Structured thinking can be credited to Aristotle. Information classification, for example. Organizing and analyzing arguments, spotting errors, and so on, which are logical flaws in reasoning, and rhetoric, which consists of well-structured persuasion arguments. When you start with a broad observation, it's easy to get carried away. Excellent leaders, like good people, are interested. And individuals that are curious enjoy being questioned. Following it, you arrive at a specific conclusion. As a result, strong leaders value inquiries. For deductive reasoning, you have Aristotle to think about. Critical and scientific thinking are two types of thinking. Its parent concept, the love of wisdom, inspired it. Plato and Francis Bacon are two of the most famous philosophers of all time. The scientific method's father, there was a lot of deliberation. By the 1500s, there was a lot of thinking going on. Francis, on the other hand, was the catalyst for the scientific revolution. As a result, a critical thinking attitude should incorporate the following. A tip of the hat to Francis. Francis Bacon was concerned about 400 years ago with cognitive biases, as they're currently known. When you're unsure about what to believe, without being deceived or ignoring evidence, thank you very much. If you're going to use a general observation, make sure it's a good one. My staff has their finest ideas in Monday morning meetings, much like mine. After that, you develop a conclusion based on your findings. Like the benefits of my team's creativity as a result of being away from work for the weekend. Inductive reasoning is credited to Francis. When you're debating, thinking, or arguing, doubting and testing are natural parts of the process. Out of your habitual critical thinking frame of mind, I'd want to thank Francis as well. Hey, history is a tough subject. When you approach history with a critical thinking perspective, you find all kinds of stuff that might normally go unnoticed. Unsung heroes, new evidence, and new viewpoints. When it comes to cultivating a critical thinking approach, it is beneficial to be able to express gratitude to some of the minds. Who was the one who laid the groundwork for this style of thinking? Professor Catalin Carrico offered a proposal in 1990. The first grant proposal for what would eventually become in the quest to develop a COVID vaccination. This is a critical technology. Attempting to harness messenger RNA's power, it was necessary to ask fresh questions in order to combat diseases in novel methods. The age-old topic of creative thinking: what are our options for resolving this issue? To see if we can come up with a new idea? For the majority of Carrico's career, thinking creatively appeared to be a failure. Her work was too unconventional for government funding. Whether it's corporate cash or support from her co-workers, she'll need both. It went unnoticed. However, one of her lengthy writings, Derek Rossi, another researcher, took notice. Rossi wasn't thinking about immunizations. However, he had suspicions about efforts could lead to something valued by researchers. A new source of stem cells has been discovered. From a languishing researcher to stem cells, it's been a long journey. Regarding the coronavirus vaccine based on messenger RNA, the plot has a lot of twists and turns that need creative thinking. Examining possibilities from a variety of perspectives, strategic and critical thinking are also highlighted in the story. Good thinking can be visualized as a three-legged stool. Creative, strategic, and critical thinking are the three legs. There is some overlap between these three, to be sure. However, each has its own set of objectives and questions. The way you approach problems is referred to as creative thinking. The objective is to consider both difficulties and opportunities from different angles, putting ideas together in novel ways to come up with new concepts or solutions. Strategic thinking, on the other hand, has a different aim. When you're trying to deconstruct thoughts and possibilities into their advantages and disadvantages and track changes over time to figure out what's causing the issue, this is what strategic thinking is all about. It takes a long time to develop conventional vaccines, especially for viruses that propagate quickly, such as COVID. Why? Why is a fantastic question for strategic thinking. Investigating the source of the issue shows how traditional vaccinations are made. Viruses are propagated, most commonly in chicken eggs. They've been gathered, altered, and after that, they're delivered all over the world. They're injected into our bodies to activate our immune systems. It's a slow process. More questions about strategic thinking. What are the advantages and disadvantages of traditional methods versus vaccines based on messenger RNA? Why is it possible that vaccines based on messenger RNA will be more effective? They are, after all, speedier. What makes them so much faster? Without going into too much detail, by tinkering with messenger RNA and injecting them with it. Any cell in the body has the ability to change into a drug-on-demand manufacturing. This new procedure is not only less expensive to produce, but it also saves time. It's quick. Where does critical thinking fit in? Critical thinking is frequently misunderstood. With strategic or imaginative thought, it goes unnoticed, which is harmful. Since critical thinking's objective is to evaluate the quality and usefulness of information, making sensible decisions and judging regarding what one should believe and what one should behave, the following are examples of critical thinking vaccination questions. Who took part in the vaccine trial? Who was left out? Is the vaccination evaluated based on its efficacy? To avoid the onset of symptoms or the spread of infection? You're skeptical if you're asking critical thinking questions. However, I am not a cynic. It implies that you're confirming evidence, as well as not ignoring assumptions and prejudices. This is significant because critical thinking guarantees that on which your strategic and creative thinking is founded on a solid basis of evidence you can rely on to be trustworthy, relevant, and valid. When you've figured out what you want to achieve, inquire about the topic, and put all three legs of the clever thinking stool to good use. That's a great idea. In its purest form, critical thinking is concerned with how you make judgments. What should I believe? That is not an easy task. That's why I prefer a mental tool that's simple to remember. To aid my critical thinking, RRV is what I call it. Reliability, relevance, and validity are all important factors to consider. A group of engineers a few years ago, a machine learning artificial intelligence was programmed to distinguish between wolf images and have husky dogs as pets 90% of the time. The AI was correct. When they examined the algorithm, however, they found it to be flawed. It came out that it wasn't employing any cues at all. That has something to do with dogs in some way. It has learned to base its response on facts. Whether or not there was snow in the backdrop of the photograph. Guess what it was if there was snow in the background? Wolf. There is no snow, but there is a husky as a pet. However, snow does not always imply wolf. It was based on shaky evidence. It's all about being consistent. Is there any reason to believe this piece of evidence? Is it something I can rely on? Is it able to withstand scrutiny? Determining the evidence's trustworthiness is exactly where critical thinking should be. Is it true that all wolves are canines? Yes. Is it accurate to say that all wolves enjoy cold weather? No. Is this algorithm therefore trustworthy? That is a crucial question in critical thinking. What about the second R, which stands for relevance? Do you ever had evidence presented to you to persuade you of something, and you're not sure what it is? What does this have to do with anything exactly? Is it important to have evidence? Is it relevant? Does it have anything to do with your conclusion? Relevance. What is relevant in one argument may not be relevant in another. Isn't always relevant in another situation because importance varies depending on the situation. Consider the snow in the wolf photo. Is the snow important when you're trying to get a job? To tell the difference between surfing and skiing? Yes, most likely. Huskies and wolves? Perhaps not. However, in order to answer that correctly, you'll need more information. Because it is context dependent. The V in your RRV mental tool stands for validity. Validity refers to the measure's accuracy. Is the evidence in favor of the argument? Is a test measuring what it claims to be measuring? In the end, the question of legitimacy boils down to this. This is a question for you or your team. If the premises are correct, would we be obligated to accept the outcome? Consider the following example. Is this a good point to make? First and foremost, all of our company's executives are women. Have received critical thinking instruction. Sully is a manager, according to the second premise. As a result, Sully has had a successful career. Training in critical thinking, is this correct? You are correct if you responded yes. This is a valid argument if the premises are true. So, what do you think of this version? First and foremost, all of our company's executives are women. Have received critical thinking instruction. Second, Sully has received critical thinking training. As a result, Sully is classified as a manager. Valid, in your opinion? No, the argument isn't valid because it has a logical flaw. If the first premise had specified, things would be different. Managers were the only ones who had received the training. Use RRV to help you and your team develop a positive mindset. To ensure that you've covered all of your critical thinking bases. To be a critical thinker, you must be able to think critically. You must think about dependability. Let's take a look at what it requires. To determine the evidence's trustworthiness that you use to make decisions about what to believe, as well as what to do when you consider someone you can rely on, you're considering someone trustworthy. They're dependable. They consistently create high-quality work. Reliable. When it comes to determining the validity of evidence, whether it's a tool, such as a consumer survey, or a method, or an outside source, such as a consultancy, is more difficult than it appears for three reasons. Bad data, hidden biases, and so on, and equating dependability with accuracy. To begin with, bad data often appears to be good data. Small or unrepresentative samples, for example. Rona, one of my clients, worked as an engineering manager. For the sake of a gaming firm, one prominent engineering school existed that he regarded as a trustworthy source of outstanding engineers. 4 engineers were hired by him. Except for one, they were all excellent programmers. The one who didn't go to Rona's dependable school, however, there were other factors. These 3 engineers were excellent, the 4th engineer, on the other hand, was not. Many of these factors had nothing to do with each other. It has something to do with the school they attended. This was demonstrated when Rona turned down an engineer in favor of a different school, an engineer from his reputable university. And that decision turned out to be a complete failure. Based on shaky evidence, 3 exceptional engineers make up his sample size. Rona's dependable school was far too little. Make that you have a sufficient number of appropriate instances to consider a source or tool to be trustworthy. Biases, on the other hand, urge us to embrace a source, even if there isn't any proof to back it up. We can be persuaded by authority bias that a job title or position qualifies a person a trustworthy source of information. Rona was entrapped in a top engineering program. On the other hand, a lack of authority can lead us to dismiss a seemingly trustworthy source. Rona, the engineer, said no. Since she attended an untrustworthy school, went on to become a well-known game designer. You can ask yourself these questions here. Is there any authority behind this source? As though they were your boss, or is this a reliable source? As though they're an authority on the subject? Confirmation bias can lead us to seek proof that confirms our conviction that a source is trustworthy and disregard evidence to the contrary. Rona gradually got over her apprehension to hire outstanding engineers from other universities when he switched to more dependable instruments. For determining the necessary job skills, he came up with a coding challenge, and it turned out to be far more trustworthy. Trustworthy. We make mistakes because of affect bias that we prefer for trustworthy sources. And why do we pass judgment on sources we don't agree with? Regardless of the supporting evidence, it is regarded as untrustworthy. It's quite acceptable to rely on your preferred news source or listen to a podcast that makes you happy given the data that they offer. However, critical thinking necessitates evaluation. What is unquestionably correct, regardless of how you feel about it? Finally, number 3, it's alluring to believe that a trustworthy source exists. Is a reliable source. Your personal assistant always says exactly what you want to hear. Your news source constantly affirms that you are correct. The terms reliability and accuracy are not interchangeable. Have you ever met someone who could always be counted on to embellish the truth? That's someone who is always wrong. Separate reliability from accuracy while evaluating a product by dividing them into 4 groups. While on the lookout for authority. Confirmation and effect biases are 2 types of biases. One of a kind, dependable and precise. Chaumal is always correct in his answers. The second category includes both reliable and erroneous information. Romy is notorious for giving inaccurate answers. The third point is that it is both unreliable and correct. Jen, on the whole, provides accurate responses. Jen, on the other hand, gives different answers. Number 4 is untrustworthy and inaccurate. Les delivers erroneous replies in general, but his responses differ. Make sure your sources are trustworthy. The ones you use to make a decision: what should I believe or what should I do? It's a good habit to get into when it comes to critical thinking. I was single before I met my husband. One of my close buddies said regarding her failed date with him, he managed a software company, she said, and he was uninteresting. I met my future husband at a gathering a few weeks later. Was it significant that he ran a software firm? To me, no. However, it's possible that it's relevant. To a would-be software engineer, was it significant that he was dull? That was the case. Until I discovered how interesting and amusing he was to me, it's difficult to determine what's relevant. It depends on the situation. It's also the second step in critical thinking. When someone makes a case, how often do they present evidence? And you're scratching your head, wondering what the point is. That's usually a clue that you're dealing with unimportant evidence. The term relevance refers to whether the evidence supplied to support a claim is relevant. It matters whether you accept or reject a claim. Whether or not it's relevant, whether it has anything to do with the assertion the claim is not supported by irrelevant evidence. And possibly added on purpose to deceive. Beyond context, the two most obvious approaches are properly assess the significance of the evidence presented to you, and your job is to look for logical flaws. When it comes to reasoning, he makes mistakes and asks how questions. Many logical fallacies exist. The ad hominem attack is the most common. When someone makes a pointless argument by condemning the individual, presenting the evidence as a counter-argument in order to evaluate the actual evidence, Jordan's claim is true or false. I work for a pharmaceutical firm that has a long history of success. In response to the COVID pandemic, had never been a proponent of working from home. A task force was formed by the leaders to assess the situation and devise a post-pandemic strategy, and presented the findings of a large-scale company survey demonstrating a strong desire for flexible employment arrangements. Sebastian, the marketing manager, was filling in for his boss, who was a member of the task force but was unavailable on that particular day. Sebastian helped with the research, demonstrating the benefits of working from home had a negative impact on productivity. On the task force, the research was dismissed. When it was about a decade old, and there were fewer individuals have sufficient internet access to be productive, how can questions assist you in making a decision? The usefulness of the information supplied to you and generated by you. This evidence was submitted by members of Shanice's task force to assist in the establishment of a work-from-home policy. A broad survey of employee work preferences was conducted. B. A statement from a consultant about the impact of working on productivity from home, and C. Studies show that pets live longer than humans when they're served little meals all day. Examine the significance of the following three pieces of evidence, using the 4 how questions as a guide. How does this data assist with the problem at hand? What is the relationship between this concept and the question? What impact does this evidence have on the decision? Are you referring to my statement or yours? To what we're discussing? Use how questions to check for logical fallacies. To make sure you're only using evidence that's relevant to back up your assertions. When it comes to critical thinking, there are a few things to keep in mind. You must evaluate the accuracy of the data you have gathered. Validity is concerned with precision. It's the third of the 3 RRVs. Critical thinking includes the following elements: reliability, relevance, and validity are all important factors to consider. Is a test measuring what it claims to be measuring? Is the conclusion of a discussion substantiated by credible, relevant, and bias-free evidence, free of logical errors? The most well-known example of a sound argument is Socrates, one of the greatest thinkers of all time, is featured in this film. This is how it goes: men are all mortal. That is a foundation that may be relied upon. Socrates is a human being. Another premise that is unquestionably correct. As a result, Socrates is a living being. A valid conclusion as well as a valid argument when considered together. Here's an example of a logical error based on Socrates' example. Men are all mortal. This is still true. Socrates is a human being. Once again, this is unquestionably correct. As a result, every man is Socrates. Here's a conclusion that isn't correct. A fallacy occurs when there is a defect in logic. Here's a spin on a logical fallacy that I really like. Socrates is a mortal man if he is a man. That is unquestionably correct. Socrates is neither a man nor a woman. This may be true, but it isn't necessarily relevant. As if Socrates were a dog. As a result, Socrates is immortal. That is another fallacious conclusion. Validity is the point at which critical thinking takes place. Can become a little too textbooky, however. For the purpose of development, let's get practical with a critical thinking mindset. In 2009, Mattel decided to launch Barbie to China. She was a well-liked doll. Her 50th birthday has arrived. China was a massive toy market with explosive expansion. There was no evidence in toy market research that the Chinese toy business is about to slow down. All of this was backed up by solid proof. As a result, it's reasonable to deduce that Barbie shouldn't have been a well-known brand in China? Here are two critical thinking questions for you to consider. The popularity of Barbie dolls in China was one of them. Relevant to toy shoppers in China? Yes, that is a reasonable assumption. The popularity of Barbie dolls in China was number 2. Pertinent to the question of whether Barbie is a brand, would it be attractive to Chinese buyers? That turned out to be less important. Mattel invested $30 million in a 6-story store in the retail area of Shanghai on High Street, which is extremely popular. It had everything to do with Barbie. There's a restaurant, a cocktail bar, a hairdresser, a spa, and lots of dolls. There are numerous explanations for this. Barbie's trip to China was a flop for Mattel. But probably the most important factor was because, due to the use of extraneous evidence, an incorrect conclusion was reached. Mattel emphasized the importance of the game too much. As a metric, the popularity of Barbie, the doll of the Barbie brand's potential popularity in China, Barbie was not a cultural symbol. She looks as if she's in the United States. Barbie-branded products were unimportant to Chinese customers. Many arguments are persuasive, yet they aren't true if the evidence used isn't trustworthy or relevant. As a result, question the evidence's credibility. By keeping an eye out for prejudices and hunt for logical fallacies to dispute relevance, you'll also construct and rely on sound arguments. When I'm having trouble raising my own intellectual bravery, Galileo and Sojourner Truth come to mind. Who both has the intellectual fortitude to express one's dissatisfaction with current beliefs? People like Hans and Sophie Scholl come to mind as well. Who has the intellectual foresight to challenge the status quo in public? After revising their own thinking, the Third Reich was formed. Intellectual bravery is a necessary component of a critical thinking frame of mind because it entails cognition. It is said to as intellectual thoughts and beliefs. According to Aristotle, courage is because it is the virtue that is in the middle between cowardice and irresponsibility. What is the best way to tell if you have intellectual courage? Here's what you should be on the lookout for in yourself. 1. A desire to think critically. Your own deeply held convictions and judgments. 2. A desire to speak up in a respectful manner in support of what you consider to be correct, even if it's not popular. 3. A readiness to confront and evaluate ideas objectively. Ideologies and points of view that you don't agree with. As a manager, you should also keep an eye out for and encourage your coworkers to do the same. Isn't that simple? No, it's difficult. That is why it is called bravery. It also requires a lifetime of practice. Here are 3 activities to do in order to improve your skills. Hearing myself is something I enjoy doing a lot. In a quiet place, try these exercises out loud before exposing them to the general audience. Exercise 1. Choose 2 widely held beliefs. When you agree with someone and when you don't. Locate and fairly evaluate evidence it contradicts a widely held opinion that you hold and the one with whom you disagree. Assume you are a firm believer in unpaid internships. At your organization, this should be done away with. Find and fairly evaluate dependable, relevant, and credible evidence that calls into question the elimination of internships with no pay, then locate and evaluate credible, relevant evidence in a fair manner that calls into question the value of keeping unpaid internships. If you're a boss, encourage the intellectual bravery of your team. And a disagreement over a decision is a fantastic opportunity to put into practice. Dividing your team into groups is a good idea. To work on evaluating each side's veracity of the discussion. Exercise 2. Look for 1 chance per month to pay attention to someone with whom you disagree. To have a deeper understanding, ask curious questions. How they got to where they are now is an example. What makes the issue of unpaid internships so difficult to solve? A difficult question? Asking persuasion questions like aren't unpaid internships a source of inequity? Only in your thoughts can you disagree. This is a chance to learn, not to argue. If you're bringing it to work, make sure it's in good condition. You can use this as an example for your team. Allow them to see your intellectual bravery. To entice them to take you on. Exercise 3. Write down one of your most vehement convictions. As well as ensuring that you are capable of supporting this viewpoint, you'll be able to grasp what you're saying if you have evidence. And that you can explain things simply and thoroughly, not by paraphrasing or duplicating what someone else has said. If you can't back it up with solid evidence, don't say it. That you fully comprehend, allow yourself to let go of a long-held belief. It takes intellectual fortitude to refuse to be passive. And embrace what you've learned without question and consider them to be correct. This is a requirement of a critical thinking mindset. There's a lot of useful information out there on empathy. What we're going to speak about in this class from the standpoint of logical critical thinking, empathy is. On Star Trek, I liked how Spock's father, Sarek, explained things. Humans rarely enjoy the serenity that logic provides. Feelings are controlled so that they do not control you. From the standpoint of critical thinking, when we're putting our conclusions to the test, putting our assumptions to the test and attempting to get closer whether or not it supports the truth, what we would like to believe, emphasizing the advantages of empathy necessitates a look at the drawbacks of empathy's what? Please bear with me. Let's begin with a shared understanding of empathy, the ability to comprehend what another person is saying is going on right now. Emotional empathy is the ability to experience what others are feeling. What that person is going through. My mother used to say, I remember her saying, "When you go skiing without a jacket, you make me cold." Despite the fact that I wasn't cold, that is what some people refer to as emotional empathy. Empathy as a tool for critical thinking. Two things are required. 1. Consider the distinction between comprehending what others are going through, and intellectual empathy is the ability to understand and feel what others are going through. Empathy for others' feelings. 2. Comprehending how emotional empathy works. In certain ways, they can be skewed and unreasonable. As a result, we may become less intellectually compassionate. In a study known as the blame game, participants were asked to assign responsibility to a group of people. Subjects: see videos of AIDS patients. I'm having a hard time coping with the discomfort. Subjects were informed that the patients had either contracted AIDS or were at risk of contracting it. A blood transfusion or the administration of an intravenous medication. The findings revealed that the participants shown a higher level of empathy to the suffering of transfusion recipients. This was evident in the self-reporting of the subject, as well as an increase in their own brain activity in areas related to the processing of pain. Be wary of emotional empathy's allure. In my volunteer work, I am a Shelterbox ambassador, a humanitarian relief organization that works on a global scale. Shelterbox is there for you when calamity strikes, assisting millions of people, one of the most vulnerable people on the planet. Donations are the lifeblood of Shelterbox. The question is as follows: which method of fundraising is more effective? The first is to use stories to elicit communal empathy for millions of people who have been forced to flee their homes. Alternatively, stories to elicit empathy for a small community. Alternatively, stories to elicit empathy. Number 3. For a single individual. You are correct if you said number 3. Intuitively, we understand that there have been several victims. Greater resources are required, however, they are frequently a nameless statistic. Emotional empathy has the power to compel us to fail to properly allocate resources. Assuming knowledge reduces our understanding. Now that you know what to look for, let's get started. Have you given up on empathy? No, from the position of critical thinking, the idea is to put intellectual empathy first. By acknowledging empathy's limitations and by recognizing when emotional empathy is required can be skewed and deceptive in a way that makes it difficult to understand. Do you have any acquaintances who usually appears to grasp concepts rapidly and can convey related stories? A beautiful example of mental acuity. The ability to comprehend, understand, and solve problems is referred to as mental agility. And swiftly integrate concepts, and then apply what you've learned in one environment to another. With practice and training, we all have the ability to improve our mental agility. My friend Noah exemplifies mental dexterity. She works as a technical salesperson. She consumes a lot of information. Books, podcasts, and videos are all excellent sources of information. Finding a topic or sector to write about is difficult. She isn't interested in anything. Samar, Noah's supervisor, was having a difficult time locating the ideal engineer. They were on the lookout for suitable applicants. However, they were unable to persuade them to join the company. In a meeting, Samar brought up the issue of hiring. Noah inquired about Samar's familiarity with the candidates. "I've seen the resumes," Samar replied. Everyone else in the meeting seemed to think so too, with the exception of Noah. Noah inquired as to if any of the candidates had pets. Samar brushed aside the question, dismissing it as irrelevant. "What right do I have to know about the candidates' pets?" Noah inquired because she was putting what she had learnt into practice from the ruthless football recruitment world, and she was putting it to use in this hiring situation. Most college football coaches in the United States, to be precise, attempt to entice great players to attend their institution with a variety of enticements. Noah had heard about a team that had been successful in recruiting by appealing to his pet cat, a top quarterback transmitting this message: "If you have any questions, please paw me." Perhaps it's a foolish tactic. The idea is that had a better understanding of recruiting. It's a private matter. She was interested in what was going on in the globe. As a result of this, she was able to apply an insight from the realm of football to technological recruitment. What went wrong? Checked her social media accounts. Candidate posted a large number of images. Their bulldog. Later, the illustrious engineer confessed the CEO's letter to was the final nail in the coffin. Whether you're working on mental agility as a leader or not, or cultivating a culture that promotes its growth, here are 5 things you believe you can accomplish. To begin, be curious. Don't wait for something to pique your interest. Newsletters, podcasts, and virtual conferences are all options. Choose themes that are unfamiliar to you and look for new ideas that don't seem to apply to your life in any manner. Isn't a big football enthusiast. But it's precisely for this reason that she looks to football for inspiration. Number 2, pay attention and listen. At conferences, admitted. She gets a lot of her ideas from listening in on conversations. Rather than attending the conference itself, I spent more time in local coffee shops. 3, take a less defensive stance. You may have the impression that your job or sector is one of a kind. Something people who aren't in your sector don't really comprehend? That sensation stifles mental agility, because it makes it impossible for us to integrate ideas that appear to be irrelevant. Noah's football recruiting proposal was initially rebuffed by Samar. However, she is no longer protective when it comes to stealing ideas from the realm of technology. 4, set aside time to reflect. This precious thought time is set aside by Noah for 30 minutes. In her schedule, she chooses a topic or issue to consider, and she enables her intellect to take her by surprise. Finally, practice making connections. How might learning about the cosmetics industry help you? Assist me in selling more insurance? What is the best way to learn more about cricket? Encourage my team to be more creative? You'll be amazed at how much mental agility can help you advance in your job. You'll be amazed at what it can accomplish for your life. Assume you've been accused of cheating on your expenditure report, or if you're being untruthful in the course of your review. Your boss does not simply believe the charge to be true. Your supervisor is willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. Here's the question: do you or your boss get the benefit? You're both doing it. Allowing for the possibility of error means to be given the benefit of the doubt. It's not about blind faith. It's all about gathering more evidence to back up your opinions. From the standpoint of critical thinking, the goal is for your beliefs to align with reality. Speed is prioritized when you believe a claim without a doubt, and effectiveness over truthfulness. The claim is the default position. Without making any attempt to discover the truth, doubt isn't easy to live with. We are driven by the need to eradicate doubt. To the belief's final destination, Tim, a buddy of mine, assured me that he had no doubts. He was convinced that his house would sell in a week. He was well aware that the market was hot, and he didn't want to be left out. To listen to any facts that contradicts his beliefs, including credible proof that his asking price was exorbitant. If had been more at ease with uncertainty, he would have weakened his hold on his conviction. I looked for evidence and got closer to the truth. Tim had openly solicited doubt by the time he said it. The stock market has plummeted, and his property was still on the market. Tim lost a lot of money since he didn't take advantage of the benefit of the doubt. There are factors at work that tempt us to be frugal. With the act of giving and thereby receiving the benefit of the doubt, here's what to keep an eye out for: sticking to a belief too tenaciously, as well as eliciting confirmation bias. You, like Tim, believe your strategy is flawless, or that a coworker is sabotaging your efforts. Confirmation bias makes us believe things we don't want to believe. To disregard evidence that raises questions and look for facts to eliminate any doubts, regardless of the evidence's quality. Allowing yourself the benefit of the doubt leaves you vulnerable to evidence. Any evidence indicating that you must make changes to your belief in order to bring it closer to the truth. Toss in some doubt by asking, what credible proof can I find that contradicts my belief? Second, leaping to conclusions that are incorrect. When we have complete faith in something, that someone has committed a blunder, we're tempted to blame it on a personality fault, and not their predicament. This is the most common attribution mistake. You can inquire about external factors here. Could have had an impact on this person's decisions, things I might be oblivious to? The third thing to keep an eye out for is causing a self-fulfilling prophecy to happen. Let's salesperson believes a rumor. Could get away with doubting the rumor if she didn't believe it. Should exchange knowledge with Hal and see whether he returns the favor, or if the rumor about Hal being a greedy jerk is accurate. In order to develop a critical thinking mentality, the idea is to acknowledge the usefulness of skepticism. Intellectual humility is fostered through sharing the benefit of doubt. While bringing your ideals closer to reality, the coin was flipped by a quantum physicist. It landed on people's heads. That's old school computers, he explained. Binary. It's either heads or tails. It's either 1 or 0. It's either on or off. Superposition is a concept used in quantum computing. A state in which particles appear to be split in two, or several locations or states at the same time. He then flipped the coin once again. Now, he said as it made its way to the floor, that's quantum computing, and that's superposition. To a quantum physicist, however, this could be an oversimplification. But what if we could superimpose our thoughts? Keep 2 or more contradictory ideas in our minds on the same day. We can go beyond true or false with experience. Through cultivating the ability to see the world in binary terms, to learn how to think like quantum physicists. As a leader, you must deal with a variety of issues. Your group must improve the current product and create a new product to take its place. You'll require a well-functioning supply network, and you'll need one that's adaptable. You must perform while also innovating. Winners never surrender. Winners also know when to call it a day. Leaders who are decisive are rewarded. Your team will know what to expect if you are decisive. And intellectual bravery necessitates a shift of perspective, despite the fact that there is a lot of evidence to the contrary. Both are correct. A complicated reality is revealed by critical thinking. where simple truths aren't always enough to communicate the complete story. Our default thinking, on the other hand, isn't fond of it. The psychological pressures we face when we have views, concepts, or ideals that are incompatible. This cognitive dissonance makes me feel uneasy. It's one of the things that makes conspiracy theories so appealing. They're mental declutterers. Quantum thinking obviates the use of mental simplifiers. From concealing complicated realities, it takes a lot of practice. Begin with elementary concepts before progressing to more complex concepts, such as policies or politics. Consider discovering that Madge, your workplace foe, is a woman. You've been recommended for a promotion. Why would she do something like this? That unsettling feeling you get when you have contradicting views. Cognitive dissonance refers to the inconsistency of one's beliefs or attitudes. Then your brain tries to make sense of what's going on. To put an end to the disharmony, here's how to put quantum thought into practice. First and foremost, postpone the story. For instance, resist the urge to tell yourself the story. Madge must believe this advertising is a good idea, is in a dying industry, and that you will soon be laid off. Second, think about using a both/and strategy. Avoid having a binary bias. You might wonder how all of these ideas are conceivable. Madge recommended me for a mediocre promotion. She also recommended me for a good promotion. Madge isn't fond of me, but she also doesn't despise me. Madge doesn't seem to care about me. Number 3, separate concepts for evaluation. Based on the labels you assign to persons, labels are both mental simplifiers and diversions. The quantum reasoning is hampered by Madge's labeling as an enemy. It is vital to examine how beneficial this promotion is. More money means more volatility, which is undesirable. People with negative labels might be supportive of ideas with valid points, as well as the other way around. Who says you can only pick one job? On critical issues? When you consider in quantum terms, you grow more adept in dealing with ambiguity. You notice things that others don't. How can you tell if you're overthinking something? Overthinking is a type of ruminating or agonizing that is unneeded. Frequently, this results in a torrent of negative ideas. Because we are constantly bombarded with information, it is difficult to avoid overthinking. We're inundated with more data than we can handle. It's difficult to know where to focus your attention. Notifications, social media, and search results are all examples of this. Everything else that others have paid to have optimized for our brains, much of what we pay attention to isn't even something we choose to pay attention to. Changing your perspective on overthinking begins with a crucial fact. When you enhance the quality of your thinking, you improve the quality of your life. The importance of quantity diminishes. The idea is to find the proper balance between overthinking and not overthinking, as well as underthinking, which leads to good thinking. Overthinking is caused by ruminating on the past and apprehensions about the future. Ignoring the past leads to underthinking and assuming we know what will happen in the future. Overthinking appears to be the polar opposite of underthinking. However, this is not the case. When you're overthinking about the wrong things, you're overthinking. It's a sign of underthinking when it happens at the wrong time. This could be something you've gone through. If you've ever had a bad experience, you know what I'm talking about. And instead of 30 minutes, it just takes 15 minutes to think about the incident objectively. Instead of gaining a few insights, you obsessively rehash everything that has happened to you that has been frustrating. And now it's been a week. You've gained nothing but a negative attitude toward yourself. It's possible that you're overthinking things. If you're underthinking because you're afraid, a medical diagnostic is given to you. You don't get a second opinion either. Your supervisor pressures you into doing something illegal. You do it without a second thought. If you have a strong opinion, you may be underthinking it. Comes from someone who tells you what you should think. You can have shaky convictions without having to be concerned about underthinking. Strong statements, on the other hand, necessitate independent critical thinking. Here's how to tell if you're overthinking something. A terrible outcome arose from a previous decision. And you can't seem to get your mind off it. Consider how things could have gone differently. Be conscious of the cycle between negative self-talk and positive self-talk. Overjustification for self-preservation. Instead, take a step back and examine your thoughts. Overthinking is also a possibility. When you must make a critical decision, you think to yourself, you must be aware of what is being discussed by others before you concentrate on this choice. When what you want to know becomes a stand-in for what you want to know, for the information you require, you're obsessing about the wrong things at the incorrect time. As a result, the importance of what's important is overlooked. What other options do you have? To begin, catch a thought with a thinking antenna. Allow it to enter your head and then release it. Spend 5 minutes paying attention to your thoughts, rather than attempting to control them. When you have to make a life-changing, irreversible decision, adjust your antenna so that you don't think about things that aren't important, and act as a receiver for those that are relevant. Second, you should downsize your thinking. Sort decisions into relevant and inconsequential categories. Commenting on social media may appear to be quite important, but it is not. However, it's unlikely to be the case, especially if your opinion will be irrelevant in 6 months. Making a decision on whether or not to accept a job offer or deciding on surgery, for example. Sort into reversible and irreversible categories. The majority of choices are reversible. It's possible to undo what you've done in an email. It's irreversible, hitting send on that email. Renting a place to live is reversible. Selling your home is a final decision that cannot be reversed. When you have to make a life-changing, irreversible decision, turn off your phone's notifications and put it away. And maintain your focus on locating credible evidence this information is directly related to your decision. Refrain from thinking about things that aren't as important, such as social networking, news alerts, and email, because they cause general overthinking and, in particular, underthinking. Finally, take 3 lessons from each result. Look for lessons in both the good and poor results. Make a list of the lessons you've learned and then let go. More information can be found in 3 classes, rather than hours of agony over what could have been. When you employ these methods, you won't fall into the trap of underthinking instead of overthinking. What will you get as a reward? A critical thinking mindset honed. I understand that growing up is difficult. It's not easy to develop a critical thinking mindset. It is entirely possible, especially with experience. By incorporating critical thinking into your day-to-day activities, friends on LinkedIn who are interested in learning as well as other critical thinkers. So, of course, I'd like to share with you my weekly practice. On each of the 7 days of the week, to exercise critical thinking, I ask myself one question. As I ponder the question of the day, I can think about any topic or notion I want. Workplace decisions, medical decisions, cultural issues, and so on. Topics that are being discussed. My timetable is as follows. On Monday, I post a purpose inquiry to myself, such as, this week, what am I aiming to do or decide? It's an information inquiry on Tuesday, such as, what is the most reliable information source for what I need to determine or accomplish? It's a query question on Wednesday, such as, I'm not sure what I'm missing. It's a viewpoint inquiry on Thursday, such as, what makes my viewpoint unique? From someone who is genuinely on my side? That's a difficult one. It's an assumption question on Friday, such as, what am I overlooking here? It's a concept question on Saturday, such as, what can I do to further clarify a thought or opinion I have? On Sundays, I ask myself a closing question such as, how can I get proof to back up my claim? A conclusion that differs from what I believe? Investing a few minutes each day to provide a sense of wonder to critical thinking ensures that critical thinking is not left to chance. Plus, it's entertaining. I want to make certain that we finish this course. Is a crucial point to remember. It's the glue that will keep everything together. When you combine all of the components of your critical thinking mentality, Intellectual modesty, the admission that you don't know what you're talking about. Everything you think you're aware of, none of us have it. That's a lovely thing since it implies we still have a lot to learn. Now you can use critical thinking to assist you. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Please don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. See you in next audiobook.